Hey, thanks for joining us at He Works Hard for the Honey again. We're going to do a weekly inspection. I'm hoping when we get in there that this hive has sort of expanded enough that we're going to need to put some new frames in the upper box. And then with the other hive, we're just going to do a regular inspection. We're going to make sure that they're not creating swarm cells, as I don't think the neighbors would appreciate that. And probably next week we're going to look into treating them for mites and parasites. So and I've got a top feeder in this one, which is a 50-50 sugar water mix, and it's got some essential oils to just give the water a little bit of a smell, makes it more attractive to the bees. And I have, at least for the moment, misplaced my hive tool, so I think some of this is going to be a little bit challenging. I can see they're building some comb up to the roof right in here. So we're going to need to take that out. Probably mention it every video, but bees are funny about space. They need 3/8 of an inch to move around, and anything more than 3/8 they'll fill with comb, and anything less than 3/8 they fill with propolis, which is a sort of natural adhesive. All right. So my main interest this week is to look at some of these outside frames and see if we're making any progress in building. Which it does not look like we are. Here's a funny phenomenon. These bees kind of create almost a ladder there. Not exactly sure why they do that, but it's always funny to see. So we're still, despite the health of this hive, not really seeing any growth on the outside, which is what I was hoping for. And I think what we're going to do is sort of mix each of these in just a little extra to sort of create this illusion that they have more space. All right. So when we go one frame in, you'll see more along the lines of what I'm hoping for. Wow, this is actually really heavy. You're going to see a great deal of nectar and honey. Wow, they've made some odd shapes in the wax there, which may mean they have a little too much space. But that's all nectar in there, and you can see actually some up the top here is capped. There were some questions this week as to why the bees make honey. So this is their nutrition. It's a carbohydrate source. Pollen is actually their protein. And like I mentioned before, here's some of that propolis up here, which is an adhesive that they use to sort of nail everything down to make sure that there aren't sort of areas where wind gets in. They sort of, if you haven't seen, sort of sturdy up the sides of the frames here with it. And I would have sworn that that was a queen if I didn't know that my queen is marked. But let's see if I can find her again. There is a really large right here. Yeah, it looks like a couple of them. That would be extremely unusual, but not unheard of, to have two queens in the same hive. All right. Put these guys back this way. Boy, I wasn't able to find my hive tool, but I'm really going to need that. It looks like they've been busy sort of building comb in between the frames, which is, you know, when you want to keep it simple. When you want to keep it simple, things like this are just not ideal. So at some point in the very near future, I'm going to grab my tool and gonna just cut that out there so we can get back to sort of a normal flat frame. Just looking quickly, I see a lot of capped brood. I see some larvae, some older larvae on this. And on the other side, I see eggs down the bottom. They're very difficult to see, I'm sure. I see some older larvae, some younger larvae. This is a pretty full frame. And as you can see again, that sort of white capped honey up in the corner. So they tend to put that up there so that when the young are born, there's an immediate food source up at the tops of the frames that they can move up to. Like I said, I'm actually going to move this into the hive a little further than it was and see if that doesn't cause them to start working on it. And again, on the other end of the hive, we are just starting to have some wax created, so we've just about reached that threshold. Generally in a hive, you want to start adding boxes when they are 80%, which we just haven't quite met yet. Although you can see sort of this is the flat foundation that I put on there. And then over here we've got some of the depth and the wax that they've added. I'm going to do over here like I did over there. Just move this in one and see if that doesn't cause them to think they have more space. I'm looking at this, and this actually looks like a honey frame that's just bursting at the seams right now. So I haven't seen my queen yet, so you want to be really careful moving these frames around. No queen means no eggs, means no bees. Although they will, in nature, sort of create their own queen, which is an interesting process. And at some point, most likely with my other hive, at some point in the near future, I'm going to need to split them into two hives to slow them down a little bit. and I'll let them create their own queen. You make sure one, oh wow, this is great. You can see some really full honey cells up here. Oh, over on this side, I'm seeing a lot of brood. Boy, this guy keeps I'm wondering if I'm gonna have to. Yeah, you can't go up my shorts, buddy. Well, the last time I flicked one of these guys, it didn't end well for me, so I'm gonna good leave him there as long as he's going above my shorts and not below. Boy, there are a handful of these guys that are just huge. I would think they were queens. Oh no. Oh. Ah, never mind. I was actually thinking they might be wax moths, which can attack hives and kind of, I mean, they're exactly as they sound. Whoa. They get in there, they eat the wax. I'm gonna have to do a little research on that, but no, those are bees, and I think they may be drones. All right, we're gonna look to some of the middle frames, which will be really full. Probably, hopefully, get our eyes on the queen, who I may have mentioned is much easier to spot in this hive than in my other hive, because she's marked with a little yellow mark on her back, which lets me know to be careful. Oh boy, I think next week I'm gonna wear some elastics on my shorts. These guys, they are enjoying the heat. Fantastic. And again, you can see there's some capped larvae towards the middle left. And you may not be able to see that there is some smaller larvae that's not capped yet, sort of in the areas around that. Now, nurse bees will go and they'll feed the larva about every 15 minutes. Alright. I don't see my queen. And as I've mentioned before, this particular hive is just, there she is. There's my queen right there under my finger with the little yellow dot on her back. That's my egg layer. So I would imagine somewhere on this frame there are eggs, and I see them. I see some really, really young larvae. Fantastic. And again, sort of nectar up the top. These nurse bees will go around and they'll feed the larva every 15 minutes. And I'm going to put this back very carefully. that. For you guys, we're just going to pull these last two frames out and look over them quickly. These are going to be sort of chock full. Because the middle of the hive is the warmest. That's where most of the brood is going to be laid. And as you can see, there's essentially a completely full frame here of capped brood, which means in the next 2 weeks or so, we're going to see really an explosion of population. And on this side as well, you can see some pollen pants there. All right. Sure, she is bringing that home, but yeah, just a completely, it's almost hard to lift up and get into the frame there. But this is just completely full with capped brood. Hashtag pollen pants. Oh wow, the queen jumped ship and is now on this one. She's moving. And the final frame, this one I imagine is also going to have just a great deal of brood and larvae. You can see down the bottom there. Boy, there's larvae all around the corners, which isn't capped yet. A great deal of capped larvae. And largely the same thing on this side. There are eggs, there are larvae. Oh, this frame is filled with eggs and larvae, capped brood. So, I was a little disappointed that they weren't ready to sort of expand into another box yet, but it looks like we're not too far off from that. And you probably noticed the difference in color of the last two frames. These are older frames. These were the frames we actually took out of hive number 2 to try to give these guys a shot in the arm, which really looks like it's working. So I am going to close these guys up. I've moved the empty frames in one to see if that will help them sort of fill out their space. We're gonna move these frames back into the middle. Throw the feeder back on there until next week. I'm going to pull some of this wax off the areas where it's not supposed to be. They call an invasion of bee space when they have room to do that. And we're going to cover these guys back up and let them get back to work. everybody coming and going. Move it, guys, move it or lose it. All right, good, minimum casualties there. We're going to put the feeder back on, and we're just going to turn it for a second, make sure there's a good airlock. Very good. And we're going to close back up. And these guys, with the exception of needing me to get in there and do a little work on some of the wax and cleaning up a little bit, are good until next week. We close up that extra entrance, which is actually there to give them a little bit of air circulation through the hive until they're a little more established, because bees, it's not uncommon for them to rob each other's hives. So a stronger hive could come over, sort of ransack and attack them, and end up stealing their honey and pollen. All right, let's go to Hive 2.